Ajanta, located 100 kilometers from Aurangabad district in the state of Maharashtra of India, conjures before one's vision a dream of beauty, of caves hidden in the midst of a lonely glen with a streamlet flowing down below, caves that were scooped out into the heart of the rock so that the pious Buddhist monk, out on a mission to spread the tenets of Buddhism, could dwell and pray. Caves that the followers of Lord Buddha embellished with architectural details and with a skillful command of hammer and chisel, with sculpture of the highest craftsmanship, and above all, with paintings of infinite charm. Of the 30 monuments at Ajanta, 4 caves, numbers 9, 10, 26 and 29, are sanctuaries or chaitya, containing a stupa at the center of the apses. The rest are monastic residences or viharas. The monks in ancient times were required to venture out to distant lands to preach the gospel of Lord Buddha. They were to keep traveling without a transit except in the rainy season, when they were to stay put at the viharas. Later, with the growth of cultural renaissance with the rule of the Guptas in India, and earlier during the reign of the Mauryan king Ashoka, there began architectural and sculptural activities in India. It was during the reign of the great Mauryan king Ashoka that the sculptural activities began in western India. At Ajanta, the paintings on the walls illustrate the events in the life of Prince Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, and the more popular Jataka stories pertaining to Buddha's previous incarnation. According to the older conceptions, the Buddha wrought many deeds of kindness and mercy in a long series of transmigration as a bodhisattva before achieving his final birth as the sage of the Sakyas. Incidentally, they contain the scenes of semi-mythological history, the royal court and popular life of the ancient times as told in romances and plays. Some pictures recall the Greek and Roman compositions and proportions. Few resemble Chinese manners to some extent, but the majority belong to a phase which is purely Indian, as they are found nowhere else. These monuments were constructed during 2 different periods of time, separated by a long interval of 4 centuries. The older ones were the product of the last 2 centuries before Christ and belonged to the Hinayana period of Buddhism. In the latter part of the 2nd century AD, when Buddhism was divided into 2 sections after the conduct of the 4th General Council under another great king, Kanishka. The new feature of Mahayana Buddhism was the concept of future Buddhas. The Buddha himself probably thought that he was the last of the long succession of earlier Buddhas who had lived before him. According to Buddhist traditions, these former Buddhas were revered even in the historical Buddha's lifetime. By the time of King Ashoka, their cult was widespread and was patronized by Ashoka. Later, when the stupas were constructed and beautified, the carvings were executed in a symbolic way. An inspired sculptor began to carve images of Buddha himself, and within the few generations, all the Buddhist sects took to worshipping images. The universe of great Mahayana contains numerous bodhisattva, the chief of whom is Avalokiteshvara, with attributes of compassion. He is also called Padmapani or the lotus bearer. The Manjushri with a naked sword in one hand stimulates the understanding. The sterner bodhisattva, who is a foe to sin and evil and bearing a thunderbolt in the hand, is Vajrapani. The future Buddha, Maitreya, will take birth to save the world. Why was there need to begin the plastic representation by way of sculptures and paintings? Was not the existence of the Brahmi script adequate enough to propagate Buddhism? No, because it was the foresight of the Buddha himself that ink would perish but not the rock. The Lord never involved himself in complexities of the philosophy. His teaching had simple ethical contents. He prescribed the rule of conduct in his eightfold path. Those who follow it were promised the cessation of the desires and freedom from the cycle of birth, death and sorrow. Though the teaching of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path was simple, yet it was not easy to communicate it in a gripping manner. Buddha himself once suggested to his disciple Ananda to set up memorial monuments such as stupas containing his relics and to erect it in places of his birth, enlightenment, first sermon and final demise, for he had seen people visiting these places during his lifetime. To the motivated monks, it was a mission to fulfill this desire of their master. They began a search for a retreat from the world. They came to Ajanta Valley, which was an ideal place for residence and meditation. An ancient Upanishadic seer once said, "The ideal place for the contemplation of the divine is a hidden cave protected from the wind, surroundings made favorable to mind by sound of water and not offensive to the eyes." The mountains of Ajanta had all this. Moreover, it was located on an important trade route that connected Pratishthan, an eastern capital of Satavahana kings. It was here he realized he could live, meditate and absorb the philosophy of Buddhism. The monks were joined by many, all masters in their own trade, painters, sculptors and carpenters. It was simply a meaningful lot, each one telling the story of man's cravings. They were masters of their kind, yet devotees to one, the Buddha. To go eternally into the memory of mankind, they adopted rock where they could dwell and paint. Was not this the most powerful vision of mankind? For 700 years, the endless hours heard the striking of chisels with hammer, the murmur of prayers and the pilgrimage of brushes on the walls before the caves came to be what they are. Here, the painter prayed with his brush on the wall. Each line and each color became a stroke of faith. He proceeded untiringly for centuries till it got absorbed. Behind all these achievements lay not only the impassioned zeal of the artist, but also the donations of the mercantile community and the unlimited support of Satavahana and Vakataka kings. With only 6 pigments in his hands, the Ajanta artist created the vocabulary of the entire color range, each speaking its own language and giving meaning to others. Though painted for religious purposes, the murals of Ajanta bear a secular rather than a religious message. Here we see a whole of ancient India in panorama. Here are the princes in their palaces, ladies in their harems, coolies with loads slung over their shoulders, beggars, peasants and ascetics, together with all the many beasts and flowers of India. India witnessed all-round development of art and architecture during the rule of the Gupta dynasty in 3 AD. The Vakataka kings, who were matrimonially related to the Gupta, ruled in the Vidarbha region between the 250 and 510 AD. The painted caves belonging to this phase are 1, 2, 16 and 17. The cave number 16 is probably the earliest one, as it contains an inscription recording its excavation by Varahadeva, minister of Vakataka king Harisena. To the same period are assigned caves 26 and 27. The rest of the caves, including painted caves 1 and 2, ascribed to the 6th and 7th century. Assault of Mara. Siddhartha took a solemn vow that though his bones wasted away and his blood dried up, he would not leave his seat until the riddle of suffering was solved. After the lapse of 49 days, at first he was surrounded by hosts of gods and spirits awaiting the great moment of enlightenment. But they soon fled, for Mara, the spirit of the world and sensual pleasure, arrived to break the resolution. When the tricks did not work, the devil disguised as a messenger brought news that Gautama's cousin Devadatta revolted and seized power and put his son and father in prison. When Gautama was still unmoved, the demon attacked him with whirlwind, flood and earthquakes. But Gautama sat firm, cross-legged. The tempter called on Gautama to produce evidence of his godliness and benevolence. He touched the ground with his hand, and the earth itself thundered, "I am his witness." Mara now tried gentle means. He called his 3 beautiful daughters, Desire, Pleasure and Passion, who sang, danced and offered him universal empire. When everything turned futile, the demon gave up and left. Sibbi Jataka. In the hall of Cave 1 on the left side is painted the Sibbi Jataka. Once a pigeon was being chased by a hawk. The bewildered bird took refuge on the shoulder of the king of Sibbi, who was born as Bodhisattva. The hawk demanded that the Lord hand over the pigeon as it was his lawful prey. The great being, in order to redeem the distressed pigeon, cut an equal quantity of flesh of his own body and gave it to the hawk. The pigeon was set to freedom. Mahajanaka Jataka. Mahajanaka's father, the king of Mithila, was killed by his brother, who usurped the throne. Mahajanaka sailed for Swarmabhumi with his merchandise, but was shipwrecked and brought back to Mithila by a goddess. There, he married the usurper's daughter Shivali and became king. Eventually, he decided to become a recluse. Here, Shivali tries to attract Mahajanaka to material pleasures, but the king is indifferent. The court jester on the left looks at the scene in perplexity. A show of dance and music has been arranged by Shivali in an attempt to keep Mahajanaka tied to worldly life. Mahajanaka goes out of his palace on an elephant to attend a saint's sermon. Mahajanaka announces his firm decision to retire as a recluse. A maid standing behind looks dejected. Shivali and her retinue listen to Mahajanaka in bewilderment. This group forms part of the procession of Mahajanaka forsaking his palace. Rows of geese are depicted on the garment worn by the lady in front, a fashion also referred to in contemporary literature. A prince, probably Mahajanaka, seated under a gorgeously ornamented pavilion, is being given a ceremonial bath before coronation with holy water poured over him from decorated pictures by 2 attendants, while 3 maids wait in attendance. The proper synthesis of the details and the characters is subdued enough to highlight the central topic, the royal lustration. Shankapala Jataka. Champeya Jataka. As a penance, Champeya, a bodhisattva born as the serpent lord, allowed himself to be captured by a snake charmer who made him dance in the court of Ugrasena, the king of Varanasi. At the request of his wife Sumana, he was released by the king, who accompanied him to his serpent kingdom. There, Champeya delivered a sermon for the edification of his royal guests. On this plate, we see the serpent king seated in his palace in a repentant mood, for he has led a life of enjoyment and has thus strayed from the path of piety. Sumana, seated beside him, looks at him questioningly. A dwarf brings him a tray of refreshment to cheer him. Here, King Ugrasena and his courtiers watch with interest the performances of the captive serpent king. Among those assembled at the royal court to watch the show of the dancing serpent are two provincials in their rustic attire, squatting in peculiar pose at the feet of the king and appreciating the dance with ludicrous gestures. This is the scene in the royal palace of Champeya, who is distinguished by a five-hooded cobra over his head, delivers a sermon to the king of Varanasi. Vidur Pandit Jataka. In the city of Indraprasth, there once lived a king who was fortunate in having as his minister the Bodhisattva, born as a sage called Vidur Pandit. He gave religious discourses to the king and his ministers. Once, one of the four kings, a Naga, wanted an answer as to who of them was superior in wisdom. The king referred the difficult question to the Vidur Pandita, whose explanation satisfied everyone. The wife of the Naga king, who happened to know the wisdom and knowledge of Vidur Pandita, asked her husband to bring him to her, an impossible task. But a Yaksha general, Punnaka, who was in love with her daughter Irandati, succeeded in bringing the sage after winning the battle of dice. Buddha in Tushita heaven. After his penultimate birth as Vishwantara, when he realized the perfection of chastity, the Bodhisattva was born as Swetaketu, a god of Tushita heaven. Tushita heaven was the heaven of satisfied gods. Sitting there, he made the four preliminary examinations of time, continent, country and family in which he would be born for the last time. Having seen that the present was a propitious time, he decided to be born in the continent of Jambudvipa, a name of ancient India. Vishwantara Jataka. Vishwantara was a grandson of King Sibi. Before his birth, a fortune teller foretold that the newborn child would be a symbol of charity. As soon as he was born, he held out his hand to his mother and said, "Mother, I wish to make some gift. Is there anything?" She gave him a purse of money. When he was 8 years old, he wished to give away something of his own, his heart, his flesh, or his eyes. As he grew up, he gave great alms, including his magical elephant with its costly jeweled trappings, which could bring rain to the drought-stricken kingdom of Kalinga. This made the people furious, and to save his own life, his father banished him. His wife Madri and his children accompanied him. He gave away everything, including his royal chariot, and walked on foot. To prove his generosity, he even allowed his 4 children to be taken away by a cruel Brahmin named Jujuka, who beat and bound the children. At night, as they travelled, he left the children lying on the ground, while he climbed up, fearing wild beasts. But the gods pitied the children, and in the guise of their father and mother, came every night to tend and feed them, and in the morning put them in bounds again. Matra Poshaka Jataka. In the realm of Benares, Bodhisattva was born as an elephant to a blind mother. Whenever he sent a sweet food to her, other elephants did not let her eat. One day, he saved a forester who had lost his way for 7 days in a thick forest. He carried the man on his back. Later, when the elephant of the king had died, there was a proclamation that the king needed another elephant. The forester betrayed and took the hunter to the forest, who caught the elephant. The Bodhisattva, despite his strength, offered no resistance for the sake of virtues. He was brought to the king's table and was decked with festoons and garlands. He refused to eat and said, "Without my mother I will eat nothing." The king, hearing this, ordered his freedom. Simhala Avadhana. King Simhala, with a crown on his head, over which is held aloft an umbrella, sets forth with all regal splendor from the city gate on a white elephant, at the head of an army, to Tamradweep, to conquer the demons. The accompanying vassals also ride on elephants and have umbrellas over them. The fluttering flags and the swinging trunks of the elephants impart a forward movement to the scene. A treacherous ogress in the guise of a beautiful maiden lures a young man and dallies with him under a pavilion. She appears in her true form on the left above pavilion. A princess at her toilet. Standing in sylvan surrounding amidst hills, a youthful princess of extraordinary charm, with rich ornaments and a diaphanous drapery, is engaged in her toilet, holding a mirror in her hand. Of her two attendants, one holds a fly whisk and the other a tray of cosmetics. A dwarf stands by gazing at the princess. Buddha preaching. Buddha, seated on a throne in the center, preaches to a large congregation of monks and noblemen, including foreigners, who have come with princely pageantry, but listen with reverence to the word of the Master. As long as Buddhism was the predominant religion in India, Ajanta continued to be in the limelight. But with the revival of Hinduism, which proclaimed that the Lord Buddha was the ninth satellite of Vishnu, Hinduism began to gain the ground which it had lost in the 6th century BC. By medieval times, the focus of architectural activities was shifted to Ellora, which was now a new trade route. The caves of Ajanta went into oblivion and neglect. By the 19th century, it was forgotten, deserted and overrun with hundreds of years of invading rock and vegetation. The caves were discovered on the 28th of April 1819 when Colonel John Smith of the British Army was out bow hunting with some of his colleagues. While scanning the hillside for prey, he noticed the carved facade of a cave just visible from behind a tangle of shrubs and creepers. Curious, he scrambled up the hillside to take a closer look, and that is how the Ajanta Caves became known to the contemporary world. Elaborate planning preceded the digging of the caves. The special technique employed shows unmistakably that there was a grand design which incorporated even the minutest detail of ornamentation. The first step was to prepare the rock face. After selecting a suitable horizontal layer of stone, a large arch-shaped window was marked out. This horseshoe-shaped opening has become the most recognized aspect of the Ajanta facade. After ensuring that the thickness and texture were right, the artist got down to work. The window, marked in outline, was dug out. The window allowed the stonecutters entry into the bowels of hard rock. As the cavity increased, the ceiling was hollowed and the columns, which were to be finished as pillars, marked out. These also served to divide the hall into aisles. The decoration of the pillars, architraves and the like was done simultaneously with the scooping out of the stone. The same workmen who shaped the monolithic pillars decorated them and adorned the walls with exquisite sculptures. The treatment of the wall before the work of painting began was the most scientific. The surface of the stone was first prepared by coating it with potter's clay mixed variously with cow dung, straw and animal hair. Once this was leveled to a thickness of about half an inch to 2 inches, it was coated with a smooth, fine white lime plaster, which became the actual painting surface. On the still damp wall, the artist first laid out his composition with a cinnabar line and then defined the subjects with an undercoat of grey or terra verte. This was followed by the addition of local colors, and once the whole wall was completely colored, a brown or black line restated the drawing to finish the composition. A last burnishing with a smooth stone gave a rich, lustrous surface. The colors, which were natural and water-soluble, consisted of purple, brown, yellow, blue, white, green, red and black. The dyes used were of vegetable and material origin: ochre, lime, lampblack and lapis lazuli. An interesting feature of these paintings is that they were not divided by frames. Different scenes depicted here blend beautifully into one another. The minor figures and the decorative patterns are skillfully utilized to direct the attention of the observer to the central figure in the painting. It has been noted that there is no perspective in these paintings. However, an illusion of depth is created by placing the figures in the background a little higher than those in the foreground. The effect is quite dramatic, as the characters seem to step out to meet the observer. Perhaps the figure that exemplifies the most is the Bodhisattva Padmapani, who dominates cave number 1. He exudes gentleness and a kind of divine innocence. Clearly a fastidious prince, he is depicted delicately holding the fragile blue lotus, his head bent sideways as if the weight of his honored jewel crown is too heavy for his head. His half-closed eyes give him an air of meditation, almost shyness. His cleverly painted limbs and torso look smooth and cool. To his left is the Bodhisattva Vajrapani. His narrow waist and the strings of pearls looped around his chest emphasize a steel strength in his limbs. An inscription in Cave 26 says, "One should set up monuments that will endure as long as the sun and the moon continue, for a man would exist to enjoy paradise as long as his memory is green on earth."
How to get to Ajanta? By air. Aurangabad can be reached from the New Delhi and Mumbai International Airport. The government-run Indian Airlines operate flight to Aurangabad daily from New Delhi and Mumbai. A private airliner, Jet Airways, also operate to Aurangabad daily from Mumbai. By rail. 2 express trains with AC accommodation ply between Mumbai and Aurangabad daily. If travelling from New Delhi to Mumbai, alight at Jalgaon, from where the caves can be reached in 1 hour. Cave timings: 9 am to 5:30 pm. Caves are closed on Monday and national holidays.